Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very empowering show coming right up with special guest Anne Grant, and she's here today to share with us her new book, The Divorce Hacker's Guide to Untying the Knot: What Every Woman Needs to Know About Finances, Child Custody, Lawyers, and Planning Ahead. Now, Anne began her career as a corporate litigator specializing in unfair business practices and consumer fraud. After her own divorce, she created her own firm focusing on family law and a holistic approach to this life transition. So let's welcome to the show, Anne Grant.
Thank you so much, Marianne. It's a pleasure to be with you.
What a joy it is to have you here. And my goodness, your book, not only was it a #1 new release, but I mean, it's helping people. So there's just people clamoring for this book.
Yeah, it's been remarkable. I knew that there was an unmet need, having gone through a divorce myself, and even as an attorney, I found that I really was like a deer in the headlights with respect to how to put my life back together. And I was looking for something like What to Expect When You're Expecting, which is a great book if you're pregnant, but for divorce. And there really wasn't anything out there like that in the market. And so that is why I decided to go ahead and write the book. And the response has been overwhelming.
Well, it's easy to see why, and also because you approach it from a very unique perspective. Number one, as an attorney, you're able to see kind of the ins and outs that most people may not be really aware of, and also having gone through the process yourself.
Yes, there's no substitute for experience, and I truly did experience the perfect storm of loss. My marriage began to unravel during the recession, and the big law firm where I had been a partner dissolved during that period of time. And then my father, who was my rock and who was really helping out with the 3 children who were fairly young at the time, he passed away very unexpectedly. So I experienced, I guess I would call the trifecta of loss that was more than my coping skills were able to manage. And so through that process, I learned how to put my life back together and how to stay grounded. And in fact, the mindfulness portion that's in each chapter of the book is what really got me through that very difficult time. And so I know what it's like to go through this. I'm very empathetic, and that comes through, I think, quite clearly in the pages of the book.
It really does. And I'm sorry for your loss. I mean, when we have that kind of loss, it's tough. And that's why I think your book is doing so well among women, because it seems that we all go through that trifecta of loss when divorce happens.
It does. For some reason, that does seem to be the case. I see it now with my clients. And again, I recognize the process of grieving that you have to go through when you go through a divorce. You really do have to go through those stages. And I also understand, what it looks like and the importance of not getting stuck in denial, for example, or anger. And so I do really focus on how to move through those stages so that you can get back on track and recreate the life that you want. And use it really as an opportunity to do just that.
Yeah, to kind of move forward. Well, what are some of the things, and you've got these great lists in your book, and you cover quite a bit. I found your book to be a great resource, but what are some of the things you suggest that women do prior to filing for divorce?
So I devote a whole chapter to being prepared. There's nothing like being unprepared, actually, and being surprised. And I will give you some specific tips, but first I want to, as I do in the book, provide a cautionary tale of what can happen if you're not prepared. So one of the gals that I represented was married to the assistant head coach of one of Los Angeles's professional sports teams. And while they were at an away game, she took the kids to dinner, And unbeknownst to her, her husband returned early. He stole the son's Jeep, filled it with his personal belongings, and then he cleaned out the joint bank account to the tune of several $100,000. And when she arrived in my office, she had $238 left in her bank account, and he'd sent her a text that he did it so she couldn't hire a lawyer. So we were able to go to court and get everything squared away, but of course not without a lot of angst and panic, really, for her. So I do start, and that's not an isolated incident. I do see similar situations occur more frequently than I would like to see. So in the first chapter of the book, I outline some very specific practical steps that I think all women should take in order to feel secure, and that actually can lead to even a better relationship. So not just for women going through divorce, but, you never know what's going to happen. Your spouse could die unexpectedly. And it's very difficult to maneuver if you haven't taken these steps to be prepared. So the first thing I recommend is that you open a bank account in your own name. And then I also recommend that you set aside money for living expenses and in case you need to hire an attorney. And that's specifically to avoid the situation that I just talked about a moment ago. So I don't know whether women know this, but they can take half the money out of a joint account and put it into a separate account in their own name if they live in one of the 9 community property states like California. Now, I don't recommend that you necessarily do that all at once because it may alert your spouse and may cause checks to bounce. But you can begin by taking out smaller amounts now and putting them in your new account so that you can hire an attorney if necessary and cover your living costs for a period of time. And then I also recommend that women open 2 credit cards in their own name. And you need to be the primary card holder on these cards, if possible, because you can have a wallet full of credit cards, but if your husband is the primary card holder and you're the secondary, he can cancel those cards without your permission. And then lastly, I recommend that you gather and copy documentation for all assets, bank accounts, investments, and retirement plans, even if they are in your spouse's name. So copy anything with a $sign attached to it. Many women will tell me that their husband insists he's going to keep his 401k or his pension, and that's just wrong. If you live in a community property state, half of that pension or retirement fund earned during the marriage is yours. And if you live in an equitable property state, you are entitled to your fair share of that 401k or pension. Yeah. And in the book, I offer a checklist of that's more specific about the documents to gather, copy, and keep in a safe place.
Oh, your book is very thorough, and I found that it was a great resource. And just, even if you're not going through a divorce, like things that women should know, and just have set in place, because a lot of times this isn't thought of until like maybe somebody passes or something happens and then you're stuck.
That's true. That happened to my mom when my father passed away. So some of those tips actually came through that experience with her. Particularly, I remember with the credit cards, most of them were in his name. And so it was really a difficult situation for her to get cards opened in her own name. And so that's also why I suggest that you take these steps now regardless, because I think that, anybody can benefit from the security that it provides.
Yeah. And they're able to move forward with that. Well, and it's, and I'm so glad that you shared that example. I had a friend that went through something like that where, one day she is married and she thinks everything's going happy, and the next day, the designer for their new home runs away with her husband, and he does the same kind of thing, cleans out the bank accounts, cuts off her phone, credit cards, everything. And so she's stuck. and it was just a difficult thing to see her go through. So what's so great now is that there's a resource for women to use so they can get better prepared. And in talking about being better prepared, when should women consider, okay, now's the time I need to be hiring a forensic accountant, and why would they do that?
So that's a great question. This comes up all the time. It just came up yesterday in one of the cases that I am handling. And forensic accountants can be indispensable in certain situations. So a forensic accountant, for example, would get involved if your spouse owns his own business. We often find that where that is the case, that, for example, he may be overstating his business expenses in order to reduce his taxable income. And so a forensic will get involved. And the reason it's important that this issue is dealt with is because whatever his net income is, or his net income, that amount is used to calculate the amount of child support and spousal support that you will receive. So if he's underestimating or under-providing with respect to documentation concerning his income, that's going to hurt you. You're going to get less support. So a forensic accountant can look closely at the claimed business expenses or perquisites and add back the ones that ought to be added back to the income that's available for support. So that's a very common instance where a forensic will get involved. They will also get involved in valuing a business. If there's a business that is owned by the family or by the spouse. And then they will get involved in what's called tracing. So oftentimes there's an asset like a home, and perhaps one of the parties contributed separate property income to pay the down payment or to make improvements. And so they will then oftentimes claim that they're entitled to a reimbursement. But in order to establish that claim, it has to be documented and traced from the separate property source. And that's a forensic accounting exercise typically. Another instance where they can be quite useful is if you think that your spouse has absconded with funds, for example. If you think he's been siphoning off marital assets and hiding them, again, they can get involved in a forensic investigation to locate those funds that you may be entitled to when the assets are divided.
Now, is that something that's pretty common where you'll see spouses that will siphon off funds or try to hide assets? Because it sounds like it's kind of a common thing where that takes place.
Well, in my experience, what I've observed is that there's kind of not every divorce case is the same, but there are some similarities. So oftentimes what will happen is someone will show up in my office and she's not there to get divorced yet, but she's starting to see some warning signs. And she wants to know what her rights are. And that's really who I wrote this book for, because it's such a common occurrence. I felt like there needed to be a resource out there to answer those questions. So we'll sit and talk, and usually during that discussion, she will tell me that either she's discovered that her husband's having an affair, or she thinks he might be. And then I'll talk with her about the steps that you and I discussed about being prepared and so forth. And then it's not uncommon that within a month or so I get another call and she's sort of panic-stricken because now she's found out by looking at bank accounts and credit card accounts more closely that there are some suspicious expenditures or transfers of money. And so what I do find is that oftentimes where there's infidelity within the marriage, there's also what I call financial infidelity, and that would be the either hiding or the siphoning off of funds without the other party's consent. I'll tell you another cautionary tale. I represented a gal who initially she went to marriage counseling with her husband in an effort to save the marriage, which I'm always in favor of doing. And then he convinced her, when it became clear that the marriage couldn't be saved, to go to a mediator. And there's nothing wrong with mediation. I think it's a really evolved way to get divorced if both parties are evolved. But in this case, what happened is he utilized, I think, the time that they were in counseling and certainly the time while they were in mediation to move money around, actually move money to bank accounts overseas. And then she learned in the midst of the mediation by checking social media that he had married another woman in Brazil.
Oh, my. Oh, my.
Yeah. Yes. So that's when she landed in my office. And, of course, there were a lot of things to unwind in that situation. And that's a pretty extreme example, but I often see, in fact, what I typically find, and the research bears out, is that women usually won't file for divorce after the first act of infidelity that they discover, but it's typically what I call the financial infidelity or financial improprieties that will then cause them to file.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because I don't know, for me personally, if I had somebody that had that was, cheating and not being the person that I married, I mean, it wouldn't take more than one time for that to be kind of a done deal, And so when you look at this, I guess there's just a whole lot, and everyone's different, but there's just a whole lot that's kind of tied up into that,
Right. There is. There's definitely, as I said, the longer I do this, the more similarity. I can almost tell now when someone comes in and begins talking with me, and maybe she hasn't quite figured out yet what's going on. And I think a lot of times, and I know I was like this, we don't want to know. I call it willful blindness. That's actually a legal term that's used in other areas of the law. And what I mean by it is we're sort of in a state of denial. We really want our marriage to succeed for lots of good reasons, either because, we have children and we feel like we've been told that it's best for them to be raised by two parents, or any number of other reasons why we want the marriage to continue. And so despite the red flags, we tend to ignore them. I did. And that's also why I felt compelled to write this book, because I know that that's the case, that a lot of women, many, many women are out there knowing within themselves that something's not right, and yet they're not taking the kinds of steps that I recommend they take to protect themselves. And then when they show up in my office, it's they're in a situation where they're feeling sort of often panicky, and we do what we can, but certainly they'd be in a better position if they were mindful and took some of these action steps before they got to that place.
Yeah. Well, and, it's interesting, too. In your book, you have this checklist for attorneys, which I love. And I thought it was great, when we're looking who's going to be a potential attorney, some of the things that we need to be asking them and kind of kind of interviewing them if they're the right person for us.
Absolutely. So what I found since I came from the outside, I didn't start in my legal practice as a family law attorney. I started out as a corporate litigator, and I did that. I had a whole career in that particular area before I started my family law practice after I went through my own divorce. And so coming from the outside, I saw that there was a lot of abuse by what I call, quote unquote, the professionals. Because, the lawyers, let's face it, they bill by the hour. And so the longer your case is drawn out, the more money they're going to make. So there are some attorneys out there who will stir the pot and increase the acrimony so that, they can bill more time. And so I created a checklist so that you can try to weed those people out and get someone who's really committed to and aligned with you in representing you in your best interest. So, for example, you want to find someone who's experienced in family law. In this era of specialization, it's impossible to do everything well. So you want to ask, how long have you been practicing? and what percentage of your practice is devoted to family law. And then you want to find someone who's looking for ways to solve problems, as I just mentioned before, not escalating disagreements. So you want an attorney who's willing to try all avenues to resolve your case and make your divorce less costly, both financially and emotionally. So you should ask, do you prefer to negotiate and settle, and what is your attitude toward mediation? And then you really want to find someone who is going to be involved and care about you personally. So a good family law attorney often has a team to help him or her, and that's great. But it's important for you to know who will be working on your case, who will be communicating with you, who will be in charge, and how you will be billed for that work. And then I'm always asked, and you want to ask, how long will my divorce take and what will it cost? And this is really a tough one. So oftentimes the answer to that question will be, it depends. And that's really true. It does depend. It depends a lot on how litigious your spouse is. But the important follow-up question to ask is, how long do most of your cases last? And if the answer to that question is 5 years, run. Because it's my view that while some cases are complex and can drag on, most cases are not that complicated. And so that's why in the book I keep walking the reader through all the various steps of the legal process, what they need to do with their real estate, their kids, their career, and their home, and all of those things so that they can keep the case moving along and keep their lawyer moving along through the process so it doesn't drag out any longer than it needs to.
Yeah. Well, your book is just featured with tons of insider tips, which I love, and also Wise Women Know. It's these quotes that kind of just provide inspiration that go with the chapter that's being discussed. And it's kind of that, for me, in reading it, when I'm reading these quotes, gave me a moment to kind of just pause and kind of reflect on what those quotes were talking about. But it's got such great information. My goodness.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's you did really good on that.
Thank you.
I think I have time for one more question here. We'll see. But so, what if someone's dealing with like a narcissistic spouse? What are some things, because that's a little bit of a different animal, and I know that you talk about that as well.
I do. So a narcissist puts his own interests ahead of yours at all costs, even if it harms the children. The only way to deal with a narcissist is to set firm boundaries. And most believe that setting boundaries means confronting and being assertive, but this doesn't work with the narcissist. The more you confront and assert your position, the more you play into their game. So when setting boundaries with the narcissist, you need to refuse to communicate unless it can be done in a manner free of conflict, manipulation, and disrespect. And you might need to insist that all communication is by email. You can let it be known that you will not respond to any communication that dismisses or belittles you and your needs. And I think it's also important to have a really good support system if you're divorcing a narcissist. And probably you want to have a good therapist working with you to help you set boundaries and then stick to them.
That's got to be such a huge thing, because narcissists will use children, they'll use whatever they can for their own advantage.
That is true, and they are completely oblivious to how it impacts the children, for example. And oftentimes will act in ways where the collateral damage from their actions can impact the children adversely. So that's why it's so important, I think, that you have a good support system, a good therapist. The kids probably will need a therapist. And then the key is to set boundaries and stick to them, because the narcissistic spouse really knows how to wear you down. They've become an expert at that, and they will go into high gear on that during a divorce.
So some good tips to be prepared for, because while things might seem that they're kind of bad, he's really going to ratchet it up.
Oh, yeah, for sure. In fact, I've written a blog, and there's a whole section in the book about how to deal with a narcissist, particularly because of that point, that you really have to buckle your seatbelt and strap in if that's who you're dealing with. And it seems like more and more the women that are coming through my door, the narcissistic traits of their spouse seem to be coming out more fully than ever.
Oh, man. Well, but you know what? What's great is, this book, The Divorce Hacker's Guide to Untying the Knot, really helps for them to prepare on what to expect. So at least they're not blindsided by what's happening.
That's right. That's the goal. I don't want them to be surprised. And I do want women to understand that divorce really is the opportunity for a new beginning. For years, we were told that married women were happier and healthier than their single counterparts, and yet a newly released study reveals exactly the opposite. Single women eat healthier, they exercise more, and they drink less than married women. Their waists are smaller, and they're having more sex than their married counterparts. So the truth is, you don't have to stay married and miserable, and Divorce Hacker is the roadmap to take back your power and create the life you want.
Well, that is what people need to do. I mean, the Divorce Hacker's Guide to Untying the Knot is such a fabulous gift for your girlfriends. You can even have it as part of your book club because it's got so much information. Pretty much every woman out there needs to at least understand the information in this book, not if they're divorced, single, whatever, but so that they can at least prepare for any kind of financial outcomes that may happen.
I agree. I think it's a good read for our daughters as they embark out on. I've had women tell me that they're going to give it to their daughters as they're launching and starting their lives, particularly because of the advice about how to be independent and financially stable and solvent.
That's important advice. And you know what? And coming from somebody with your skill set, I mean, it means so much. It's got a very unique perspective, as I said when we first started this discussion. Well, Anne, where can people connect with you and be part of your community?
So I can be found at thedivorcehacker.com. I also have an app called Divorce Hacker. So, for example, if you're out there interviewing lawyers, you can access on your cell phone that list of questions to ask, because I know you might be nervous and might not remember them. And if you check out our website, there are a number of different ways to connect. There are blogs that are regularly posted. There's a community on Facebook. And certainly the book is another way to get involved and I know there are women all over that are actually starting groups, support groups, and they're using the book almost as a study guide. So I'm just thrilled to hear that it's actually really helping folks out there.
Well, I don't doubt that. I mean, it is a great resource, The Divorce Hacker's Guide to Untying the Knot. Anne, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
My pleasure.
Well, thank you so much, Anne. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and, of course, to talk about your new book, The Divorce Hacker's Guide to Untying the Knot, What Every Woman Needs to Know About Finances, Child Custody, Lawyers, and Planning Ahead. Again, if you'd like to connect with Anne, you can at her website, thedivorcehacker.com. There's tons of great resources, and I highly encourage you not only to pick up the book, but also become part of her community. Again, you could pick up The Divorce Hacker's Guide to Untying the Knot at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie bookstores. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.